General Hospital will reveal. When Vaughn first arrived in Port Charles under the guise of a seasoned WSB agent, most saw only what he allowed them to see, a stoic professional with a silent edge. A man built by missions, secrets, and a life spent operating in the shadows. He was quiet, precise, and detached, the embodiment of the agency's ideals. To the citizens of Port Charles, Vaughn was merely a shadow drifting in and out of conversations, appearing only when something needed fixing from behind closed doors. His mission was clear. Monitor Jocelyn as she plunged deeper into the investigation of Professor Dalton. But for Maxie, everything changed the very moment her eyes met his. It wasn't anything Vaughn said, he was far too careful, too disciplined for idle words. It wasn't even his behavior, which was indistinguishable from any other agent passing through on classified duty. But in the way he moved, in the tilt of his head, in the slight quiver of hesitation when she mentioned Frisco's name in casual recollection, Maxie felt something stir. There was something eerily familiar about him. Something that pulled at long-buried memories of a childhood spent waiting for a father who came and went like the wind, always chasing something or someone else. Vaughn's presence wasn't a shock to her senses, it was a confirmation. She didn't need to see a birth certificate. She didn't need a DNA test. Her heart had already whispered the truth. Vaughn was her brother. That knowledge, as certain as it felt, was too heavy to speak aloud. Maxie had grown up with unanswered questions, abandonment stitched into the fabric of her identity. Frisco's absence had left more than just a void, it had left scars. And now, standing before her, was the ghost of every unfulfilled promise Frisco had ever made. Embodied in a man who didn't even realize the depth of the blood they shared. So she chose silence. She buried the truth deep inside her chest and wore her most composed expression. She would watch him. She would learn him. And she would protect herself from the crushing disappointment that had defined so much of her past. As Vaughn embedded himself deeper into his mission, his path inevitably intersected with Maxie's more and more. A bump into each other at Kelly's, a shared glance during a town event, a brief exchange outside the courthouse, they were minor encounters. But each one left Maxie more unsettled than the last. Vaughn was kind. He listened. And there was something in his eyes when she spoke that mirrored her own, a sadness, perhaps, or a sense of longing. Whether he recognized her or not was unclear, but Maxie began to see layers beneath his icy demeanor. She could see that, like her, he carried ghosts too. The more time they spent around each other, the more the unspoken began to scream between them. Maxie sometimes caught Vaughn staring at her too long when she spoke of her children. She noticed how he tensed when she reminisced about her father, how his expression would subtly shift, pained, almost. But he never asked questions. He never pushed. He kept his secrets just as tightly as she kept hers. And in that mirror of silence, they found a strange kind of comfort. But Maxie's internal struggle was growing unbearable. She found herself imagining what it would be like to say it out loud, to call him brother, to see his reaction, to open the door to a new kind of family she never believed she could have. She imagined sitting across from him at Kelly's, their coffee growing cold as they filled the years with stories they never got to share. But those were only daydreams. Fragile things easily shattered. She reminded herself of the reality. Vaughn was a spy, a man who might vanish as quickly as he had come, swallowed up by duty just like Frisco. What good would it do to tether her heart to someone who might already be halfway out the door? And so, Maxie did the only thing she felt she could do. She smiled politely. She asked about the weather. She let her hand brush against his when passing him a cup of coffee and pretended not to notice the electricity that surged through her fingertips. She played the game, holding back a tidal wave of emotion behind a mask of civility. Each encounter with Vaughn became both a balm and a torment. She cherished them and dreaded them. Feared that each one might be the last, but also feared what would happen if they kept going. What Maxie couldn't know what no one could, was that Vaughn had his own suspicions. That he, too, had started to notice the way she looked at him, the way her voice caught when she spoke of their father. He had been trained to spot lies, to decode intentions, to detect danger in the most subtle expressions. But nothing in his training prepared him for this. For the idea that he might have a sister he never knew about. For the possibility that the man he had grown up resenting for being absent, Frisco, had other children, other lives, and other responsibilities that he had never acknowledged. Vaughn didn't dare ask. Because to ask would be to open a door that couldn't be closed again. So the two of them moved in a delicate dance, orbiting each other with growing intensity. Each too afraid to speak the truth that pulsed between them. Maxie protected herself with denial, Vaughn with discipline. But with every passing day, the walls between them weakened. Every moment they shared was another crack in the barrier. And eventually, someone, would force the truth to the surface. But until then, Maxie would carry the secret like a fragile ember. Hidden away, burning quietly in the center of her chest. Because sometimes, the truth wasn't the safest thing. Sometimes, silence was the only thing keeping her heart from breaking again. Mac had carried the burden of truth for far longer than he had ever intended. Years ago, he had made a promise, a solemn, personal vow to Frisco, one that bound him not as a police commissioner, but as a man who once considered Frisco a brother. When Frisco revealed that he had built a second life outside of Port Charles, one that included a son born from a clandestine relationship with another WSB operative, Mac had been taken aback. He had urged Frisco to do the right thing, to reach out to Maxie, to bring Vaughn into the light. But Frisco, as always, vanished into the fog of duty and espionage, and Mac was left as the unwilling keeper of a secret that had the power to shatter lives. He had believed, at the time, that silence was the least harmful option. After all, what was the use in opening wounds that might never heal? But the moment Vaughn began appearing around Maxie, something deep within Mac stirred with unease. It was a growing discomfort, like watching history begin to repeat itself in real time. Vaughn was polite, respectful, protective, even kind, but there was an invisible tether forming between him and Maxie that Mac couldn't ignore. It wasn't romantic, but it was something far more profound. It was instinctual. Vaughn was drawn to Maxie with a gravity he didn't seem to understand, and Maxie, in turn, began to soften in ways Mac hadn't seen in years. Her defenses, once ironclad, began to crack in Vaughn's presence. Her laughter came easier. Her silences were deeper. And in her eyes, Mac began to see something he had prayed never to witness, hope. Dangerous, unguarded hope. He knew those eyes. He had raised Maxie, watched her grow through loss and heartbreak and disappointment. He had stood by her through every betrayal, every letdown. Every time she had to swallow the ache of Frisco's absence. And now, there was a flicker in her gaze that Mac recognized too well, anticipation, confusion, a longing to believe in something impossible. And it terrified him. Felicia, too, began to grow suspicious. She had always trusted her instincts as a mother, and something about Vaughn's sudden integration into Maxie's life felt too fluid. Too organic to be mere coincidence. He seemed to know things he shouldn't, family rhythms, local traditions, little quirks about Maxie that only someone with a deeper connection could truly appreciate. And then came the night that changed everything. Maxie had found herself cornered, figuratively and physically, when remnants of an old WSB operation surfaced in Port Charles. A pair of rogue operatives, seeking revenge on Vaughn, mistakenly targeted Maxie, believing she held classified intel. In the chaos that erupted near the docks, Vaughn emerged from the shadows just in time, disarming the threat and shielding Maxie with his own body. When the danger subsided, Felicia arrived moments later, having been alerted by a cryptic call from Mac. And what she saw froze her in place, Vaughn holding Maxie in his arms, whispering reassurances with a tenderness no stranger could possibly summon. It wasn't just concern. It was something deeper, rooted in blood, unspoken but undeniable. In that moment, Felicia saw it, truly saw it. The way Vaughn's hand cradled Maxie's head. The protective way he positioned his body between hers and the world, the silent anguish in his eyes. It was Frisco. The legacy of a man who had left too many stories unfinished now stood before her in flesh and blood. She didn't need Mac to tell her. She knew. But the truth can only remain hidden for so long before the world conspires to expose it. The catalyst came unexpectedly, as it always does. During a WSB mission gone awry. Vaughn was forced to reveal his true identity to save Jocelyn from an ambush orchestrated by Dalton's inner circle. In a desperate attempt to gain trust and protection, Vaughn handed over credentials to the PCPD, credentials that were promptly leaked to the press. Within hours, news outlets were flashing headlines across screens: Vaughn Jones, WSB operative and son of Frisco, identified in Port Charles. And just like that, the web of silence unraveled. Felicia stormed into the station, demanding answers from Mac. She wasn't angry in the way people often are when they feel betrayed, she was devastated. Her voice trembled not from rage, but from disbelief. How long had Mac known? How could he keep something so monumental from her? From Maxie. Mac, cornered at last, confessed everything. His voice cracked under the weight of guilt. He admitted to the promise made long ago. To the silent agony of watching Vaughn and Maxie grow closer with each passing day, knowing what he did and being unable to act. He explained that he had feared the emotional fallout more than anything, that he hadn't wanted to see Maxie hurt again, not by Frisco, not by another echo of the past. But no amount of reasoning could mend what had already broken. Maxie, too, confronted Mac. Her voice, usually so full of certainty, came out hoarse and trembling. She wasn't angry about Vaughn being her brother. She had suspected it all along. What shattered her was the silence. The way everyone seemed to know except the one person who had the most to lose. She had waited for someone to give her the truth, to tell her that her instincts weren't deceiving her. She had waited for Mac to be that someone. And instead, all she received were measured glances and conversations cut short. Her grief erupted not as tears, but as a scream, a raw sound that echoed in the walls of the station, a sound of betrayal. Not just by Mac, but by fate itself. Because Maxie hadn't asked for another father figure to lie to her. She had built her life on the ruins of abandonment and found her strength through scars. And yet again, the past had reached into her present and pulled her down. Mac stood frozen, unable to respond. Felicia pulled Maxie into her arms, and for a moment. They mourned together, not just for the secret, but for all the years they had lost, all the chances to heal that had been stolen by silence. Vaughn, standing nearby, watched in stunned silence. Tears threatening to fall. He had come to Port Charles as a ghost. Now, he was flesh, and the family he never dared dream of stood fractured before him. The truth was out. But it had left scars that no apology could instantly heal. The road ahead would be long, winding, and uncertain. But it was a road finally grounded in truth, a truth that could now be faced. Not feared. For the first time in his life, Vaughn understood the true weight of what it meant to belong, and the ache of having never belonged before. He had always seen himself as a soldier of silence, a product of secrecy and sacrifice, molded by the unrelenting expectations of the WSB. But as the truth unraveled, piece by painful piece, and the carefully constructed walls of his identity crumbled, Vaughn stood face to face with a part of himself he never thought he'd encounter, the abandoned son, the estranged brother. The missing piece of a family torn apart by time and choices not his own. The revelation of his bloodline had not been something he orchestrated, nor something he expected to feel so deeply. But when he saw the devastation in Maxie's eyes, when he witnessed the storm she had weathered just to survive the legacy of Frisco's absence, something within him broke. Vaughn was no longer just a covert agent with a mission. He was now a man with a soul stretched between the agony of the past and the fragile possibility of healing. And in that moment, he knew the only thing that mattered wasn't the operation, the cover, or even the mission. It was Maxie. It was family. So he made a decision that no one expected, not even himself. He walked away from the only life he had ever known. He submitted a formal request to be removed from active WSB duty, a resignation that sent shockwaves through the agency. Jack Brennan tried to dissuade him, warning of the consequences, of the vulnerability that came with stepping out of the shadows. But Vaughn didn't flinch. For the first time, he wasn't running toward a threat or away from his own reflection. He was standing still, rooted in something real. He returned to Port Charles not as a specter, not as an agent lurking behind corners, but as a man ready to make amends. He didn't flood Maxie with apologies. He didn't plead for forgiveness with grand speeches. Instead, he stayed. He showed up. He carried groceries for her, made breakfast for her kids, stood beside her at family events, and listened without interrupting when she spoke of Frisco, of the pain, the loss, and the dreams that had died quietly inside her years ago. He never asked for a place in her heart. He simply earned it. Maxie, for her part, struggled. She had spent so much of her life building defenses, constructing emotional armor to shield herself from a world that constantly took more than it gave. But Vaughn's presence wasn't invasive. It was gentle, patient, and persistent in a way that didn't threaten her boundaries but instead respected them. Night after night, she would sit alone in her room, clutching old photos of a father who'd vanished like a ghost, tears slipping down her cheeks as she tried to reconcile her past with this new reality. And night after night, Vaughn remained nearby, not pushing, not probing, just waiting. Eventually, the dam broke. One quiet morning, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window of the Scorpio home, Maxie walked into the room, found Vaughn making pancakes for Georgie, and simply wrapped her arms around him from behind. No words. No dramatic declarations. Just the simple, raw gesture of a sister reaching for the brother she had waited a lifetime to hold. In that embrace, something healed, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to begin again. Enough to forgive. Felicia, too, found solace in the new chapter unfolding before her. She saw Frisco in Vaughn's profile, in the cadence of his speech, and the subtle intensity of his gaze. But unlike Frisco, Vaughn stayed. He sat at her table, laughed at her stories, helped her with repairs around the house, and brought life back into a home that had echoed with absence for far too long. When she finally invited him to move into the house, it was more than a gesture of hospitality, it was a declaration of love. A way of reclaiming what had been lost, not by erasing the past, but by honoring it with every new memory made. The Scorpio home, once marked by longing and old photographs of what could have been, began to transform. There was laughter again, awkward at first, then steady. There were family dinners filled with clinking glasses and unspoken gratitude. There were quiet evenings where Vaughn read stories to James and Georgie, where Felicia stitched new family portraits into the tapestry of their lives. Even Mac, once distanced by the weight of his secrecy, was slowly embraced again. Maxie, in her own time, came to realize that he had never been the villain. He had only been trying to protect what he loved most. And for that, she forgave him. Port Charles, a town so often caught in the whirlwind of tragedy, betrayal, and rebirth, now found itself quietly celebrating the return of something rare, completion. Vaughn, the outsider, the mystery, the ghost of Frisco's past, was no longer just a name on a leaked document. He was family. He was brother. He was son. And with every day that passed, he etched himself deeper into the life he had once watched from afar. And then came the moment Maxie would never forget. It was simple. There was no music swelling, no dramatic pause, no audience. It was just the two of them, sitting on the back porch, watching the kids play in the yard as dusk painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with certainty, with peace, with love. And for the first time, she said it. Brother. And in that single word, spoken so softly yet carrying the weight of years, Vaughn understood he was home.